Hey guys, Steve from the Tech Buzz Gaming, and today, yes, I've got more games for the NES collection, and honestly, I've got some pretty hard to find common games. Not just common games, but I've got a few in there that are, well, pretty rare themselves. So, sit back, relax, pull up a chair as we take a look at some of these games for the NES. Let's take a look. One, two, Freddy's coming for you. 3, 4. Well, I'm not going to go down that road. Listen, this is a game that is actually very sought after for the NES. It's actually kind of on the rare side. Nightmare on Elm Street is a 4-player game. If you're into horror games like I was when I was a kid, this is a game that you should check out. This is based on the 1990 Wes Craven slasher film, A Nightmare on Elm Street. Now, what could you possibly do in this game that would make this exciting, right? The player takes on the roles of, ordinary teenagers, just like in the movie. Additional teenagers can be controlled by up to 3 other players with the use of the NES 4-score. That's their 4-player attachment. The objective is to scour the vicinity of Elm Street, collect the bones of the supernatural serial killer Freddy Krueger, and dispose them in the local high school furnace. A Nightmare on Elm Street is a horizontal side-scrolling beat-em-up. The game's environment is inhabited by hostile characters such as zombies, cats, dogs, skeletons, bats, rats, spiders, and minotaurs. Wait, minotaurs? That will attack a player's character. Being attacked a certain number of times will cause the player to lose a life because the game takes place around midnight. Certain areas are initially locked off from the player and require a key to be collected for a later access. With the individual buildings, the player must collect the bones scattered throughout the level before being able to leave. When all the bones are collected, a boss battle with Freddy will commence. Defeating Freddy will allow both the players to exit the area and earn the player a key that allows access to a new area. If you're into horror flicks, or even if you're just into beat-em-ups, and you can find this game, check out A Nightmare on Elm Street. The next game I picked up was Advanced Dungeons & Dragons Heroes of the Lance. Now, of all the hundreds of games that were released for the NES, there was none other quite like the oddity that is Heroes of the Lance. It's largely regarded as one of the worst games of all times, making several notable worst lists, including Electronics Gaming Monthly and Nintendo Powers. Many gamers who have played Heroes find it too difficult and frustrating to complete, which is a stark contrast to Nintendo Power's claim that it could be beaten in less than 5 minutes. Having finished it several times myself, I can safely say that both scenarios are an exaggeration. Through the latter, only because the characters move so slow. Now, this is based on the PC game of the same name, which I've never played, and take on the role of 8 heroes from the Dragonlance books, which I've never read, as they attempt to recover the discs of Mizushikia from the ruined city of Exazatarnov. What follows next is one of the biggest, how the heck could they have let this hit the store shelves like this, gaming experiences that you have ever likely have to have. If you're not sure and you think I'm making this up, pick up this game and check it out for yourself. I know you'll be disappointed. Yo, Joe! Are you a G.I. Joe fan? Well, if you are, this Capcom release of G.I. Joe, The Atlantis Factor is a game that you should pick up. Now, there are 2 versions of this game. Well, there's 2 G.I. Joe games for the NES. I shouldn't say there's 2 versions. There's 2 games. And this was made back in 1992. G.I. Joe, The Atlantis Factor And the other game, which we're going to talk about a little bit later, A Real American Hero. And these games are highly sought after and valuable. Now, the gameplay for this game, the game format is similar to that of, if you guys think about Bionic Commando from Capcom, the series, with an overhead map of various stages. And in order to progress, you must navigate the map and clear each sub-stage, leading up to one of several Cobra bases. Once in a base, you must fight through like hostile Cobra forces and also complete a secondary mission such as rescuing hostages, setting bombs, or locating a key item. The fun stuff. Each base stage contains and concludes with a battle against a Cobra leader like Overkill, Cesspool, Firefly, Major Bud, Destro, and of course, Cobra Commander himself. Now, there's several player characters. I'm glad you asked. General Hawk, Roadblock, Wetsuit, Snake Eyes, Storm Shadow, and Duke. And at the beginning of the game, the player can only use Hawk and must unlock the other characters one by one by completing other stages. Once players have discovered a character, they can decide which character they will come with. You find these guys, you can alternate between them. Now, different characters have their own abilities, whether it's agility, stamina, strength, ratings, other things like that, unlike the previous game. So this is the part 2, if you will, of G.I. Joe American Hero. But check this out. If you're into the G.I. Joe franchise, the Atlantis Factor. Another game that I managed to pick up was Top Secret Episode Gago 13. Now, when I was a kid, I would read whatever gaming magazine or tip guide I could get my hands on, and Gago 13 was a game that would show up often, and it always looked like a fascinating game, but maybe too advanced for my age. Later, when I picked up this copy last week, I didn't really give it much of a chance. I wrote it off as not my style of game, and I don't think I was ready for it anyways. So, I decided for this video to give it one more chance. And, well, Gago 13 is rough around the edges, but it turned out to be a fun game with significant variety. Now, Gago 13 is a Japanese manga series written by Tako Saito. It centers around the assassin for hire Gago 13, who is also known by his predecessors Duke Togo. The manga began in October of 1968 and it's still an ongoing series nearly 50 years later. The series has expanded into various other forms of media, such as live-action movie, 2 animated movies, animated TV series, and several video games. Now, the Gago 13 Top Secret episode for the NES released in North America in September of 1988, but in my opinion really hasn't held up. You're a secret agent, and this game takes on several play styles and appears as needed throughout the course of the game. The first of these is a horizontal side-scroller mode where you directly control Gago 13. So if you're into these types of games, the secret agent type games, the old school 8-bit games, check it out. If you've tried it before and you're like, not my cup of tea, give it another go. I did, and I wasn't disappointed. Another game that I picked up that I wasn't really familiar with, but after doing some research, I was like, wow, I didn't know this, but this is actually a spin-off of the 1986 release Gradius. And so I want to kind of take us into this a little bit. Players are allowed to continue from where they leave upon death instead of being returned to a predefined checkpoint, as in, previous Gradius traditions. Now, the first player will control Vic Viper, and the second player takes the reins of the debuting spacecraft, Lord British. Now, the game does feature 6 stages, which alter between horizontal and vertical scrolling. Now, just like any other game, there's power-ups. There are no continues in the single-stage mode. There's a 2-player mode, and the number of continues can be changed throughout using the dip switches. Now, the player gains power-ups by picking up capsules left behind by certain enemies, as opposed to the selection bar used in the other Gradius games. Now, however, the Japanese version of Life Force keeps the selection bar. So many of the power-ups can be combined. For example, an option fires a second or third. The Ripple and Laser, however, are mutually exclusive. The only power-ups that could survive the ship's destruction is the option called Multiples in the English release. They followed the exact flight path of the player's ship and fired when they did, but they are otherwise invulnerable. Upon the ship's destruction, the option floats in space for a brief time before disappearing, and the new ship can grab them and retain them. So if you're into Gradius or the Gradius games, check out Life Force. The next game I picked up from Ultra was Metal Gear for the NES. Now, how can you go wrong with Metal Gear, right? This is a classic game we all know from the GameCube and Xboxes. This is one of the originals, so you have to get it, right? The player controls a military operative named Solid Snake, whose objective is to infiltrate the enemy's base while avoiding visual contact and direct confrontation with patrolling guards. If the player is seen, the game enters the alert mode. Now, in this situation, Snake must escape from the enemy sight in order to resume infiltration. The method of escaping, well, that varies depending on the circumstances behind the discovery. If Snake is seen and only a single exclamation mark appears over the enemy's head, only the enemy in the player's present screen will attack, and Snake can escape by simply moving to an adjacent screen. However, and there's always that however, if 2 exclamation points appear over the enemy, or the player triggers an alarm, or by being spotted by the camera, infrared sensors, etc., well, Snake's he can, by creating a loud noise through an explosion or an unsuppressed gunshot, he can get reinforcements from off-screen, and they'll appear as well. Snake can only escape by eliminating all incoming enemies. So if you happen to do any of this stuff and get a bunch of guys coming out at you, well, guess what? It's wartime, baby. It's go time. You have to kill all these people. And Snake will, again, only escape if you defeat all those enemies and going outdoors and entering an elevator or entering the boss battle. So, this is a game, if you're into Metal Gear, this is definitely something you should pick up. Well, how can you talk about Metal Gear and Snake without talking about Snake's Revenge from Ultra? Now, this was the sequel, if you will, of the original Metal Gear. Now, a lot like the original Metal Gear, the player's objective is to infiltrate the enemy's stronghold while avoiding detection from enemy soldiers, just like in the previous version of the game. Now, in order to fulfill their mission, the player must collect a variety of weapons and equipment such as firearms, explosives, and rations, as well as card keys to access new areas. Now, if the player is discovered by the enemy, the game will go into an alert mode, just like previous, causing enemy soldiers to enter the screen and attack the player. Now, the player must defeat a certain number of enemy soldiers to return to the infiltration phase or go to a different floor of the area. In some cases, particularly when a guard sees the player and a single exclamation mark appears and so on over the head, just like the original, or 2, the player can also escape the alert phase by simply moving to the adjacent screen, so you don't have to beat everybody all the time. So I changed the original Metal Gear formula is the fact that the player now begins the game with a combat knife and handgun are readily armed. The A button is used for the firearms and explosives as in the original game, whereas the B button is used for a melee attack with a punch or a knife, depending on which one's assigned. So again, if you are a big Metal Gear fan, or if you just kind of bumped into this series, check it out on the NES. Well, as I stated previously, I had to pick up the G.I. Joe Real American Hero, which is, well, it's the first game in the series here. Back in '91, the game was made. The player takes control of a team of 3 G.I. Joe characters, each with his own specialty. The goal of the game is to navigate through 6 stages on a mission to finally bring down Cobra. The initial character roster consists of Duke, Snake Eyes, Blizzard, Captain Gridiron, and Rock and Roll. A 6th character, Hawk, gives orders to the team between missions and becomes available as a playable character for a final stage. The player's first character is automatically assigned depending on the stage, while the second and third characters are freely chosen. The player can also collect power-ups in the game that increases an individual character's abilities. Gun icons increase firepower, K rations recovers energy, and chevron icons increases the current character's maximum stamina. Bullet icons refill the player's collective ammunition, and bulletproof vest icons that grant temporary invincibility are also available at destination locations on each area. Icons flashing in the red are more valuable than ordinary icons. All upgrades garnered during the course of the game are permanent, provided, of course, the character survives the mission. So again, if you're into G.I. Joe, pick this up. I am so happy to add all these games to my collection to continue on my journey of the complete North American NES collection. All right, guys, there you have it. I am well on my way to continue the journey here for the complete North American collection of the NES, and I am super excited. I had an awesome pickup this past weekend, and I know I've been not on the YouTubes, if you will, for the last week, but as you know, I was getting over a sinus infection, and so I had to wait for my voice to come back. I still have a little cough here and there, but we're good to go. I appreciate everybody to continue liking, subscribing, and all that great stuff. Hit the comments below and let me know, out of all the games I picked up, what was your favorite? And did you have any of these games as you were starting out? Let me know.